Y'all ready? My name is Paul Beljan. I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist in Scottsdale, and I've come up here the last few years to do this lecture for Deb Cradaville and Learning Pathways. So this lecture is first of all about executive functioning and attention, with just kind of a brief, really elementary primer on how the brain works, but it's kind of interesting. This is not a lecture of a bunch of research, and here's what the research found, and here's how you'll never apply it to anything. This is straight out of my practice, and this is how I see things after doing this for a long time, and what I think works, and really makes a lot of child behavior really understandable, okay? So just really quick, a poll. How many people here are teachers? Mercy. How about school psychologists? Good. We'll tear that profession apart. How many? Any psychiatrists? Great. Physicians? Other physicians? Sorry, you're a physician. Other physicians? Great. Okay. And we have one neuropsychologist here, too, so no pressure there on me. Means I have to get everything right. The way I talk is pretty loose. If I say anything offensive, I have a pretty loose sense of humor. Please don't be offended. I don't mean anything. I just have the mind of an 8-year-old. Anyhow, if you have questions, please feel free to ask, okay? But let's keep the questions to something that might not be understood and not your personal life. I'm willing to stick around afterwards if you want to ask questions about a particular child or something like that. That's perfectly fine, okay? And then at the end, there'll be a lot of time for questions if I talk fast. So with that, yikes, that's not where I want to be. All right, did you get all that? All right. This used to be, come up here and do this as a gifted lecture. So for all the gifted people, I'm just going to leave now. Now, first of all, I want to say that Deb Cradaville and Learning Pathways has me here. This is not an actual commercial for them, but in a way it is, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about, the kind of treatments for executive function deficit and attention deficit, is generally medication or environment, structure, consistency, and routine, right? And a lot of times what happens with kids is with kids with ADD and that, is we try to intervene with them in a way that they don't have the disorder, and it ultimately fails. For instance, I tell a lot of stories. I went to a school meeting one time on a child who had a severe executive deficit, and he kept having problems, and he would kind of go off and run out of the room, that sort of thing. So the school had this thing called their 5 steps to anger control. And what this was these 5 giant footprint stickers with a title on every footprint. And that if you did these things, and if you stopped and thought about these things, you would control your anger, and you wouldn't run out of the room, and you wouldn't have ADD, okay? And they couldn't understand why it wouldn't work for this particular child. Well, the reason why it wouldn't work for that child is because when you have ADD, when you have impulse control deficit, those 5 steps are the last thing on his mind. It will never occur to that child, because that's the nature of the deficit. If he could think of those things and factor them in at the right moment, probably wouldn't have the disorder, okay? So what I started doing is searching for most parents, a lot of parents don't want to use medications with their kids, okay? Even though stimulants are pretty benign, most parents don't want to do it. And behavior management only goes so far. So I found something of doing neurocognitive therapy. And we do it in a very specific way. And it always blends inhibition, concentration, with motor systems. And one of the things I'll talk about is that cognition is the extension of your motor systems. Okay? So if you integrate the two, you function a heck of a lot better, and it works beautifully. And that's what Deb does as well. So to move on, some of the topics we'll talk about is how the brain works, a back-to-front model, and a subcortical to higher cortical model, which is, I wish I could share this paper with you, but it's unpublished. It's going to be called the dual-tier model. If you're in any kind of neuropsych literature or cerebellar literature, look this up. Dual-tiered model by Dr. Len Koelsiel. He's my mentor. This stuff is brilliant, and it explains so much. It's the coolest thing in the world. And we'll talk about the Mirsky model, which is now going to be called the dual-tiered model. But anyhow, first thing is Dr. Koelsiel says, personality and behavior is driven by cognition. All right? So cognition is the extension of a motor system. Now, that's a really different way of looking at people as opposed to how most psychologists look at people, which is personality drives everything, okay, or how you were raised or this or that. Your brain drives everything, okay? And I can't talk yet of a brain-based disorder, and the way your brain works in conjunction with your environment drives who you are. In terms of that brain, everything is multiply determined. So it's kind of a weakest link in the chain system. If there's a hitch in the giddy-up of any one area, it's going to have a ripple effect and an undermining effect of various other areas. So we have to keep that in mind. How the brain works. Real simple orientation to it. You got your frontal cortex. This is a motor cortex right here. So that forward is frontal cortex. Everything in front of that motor cortex is prefrontal, okay? But we'll just call it frontal lobes. But you get the idea right away when I say something like cognition is the extension of motor systems. They're right next to each other, right, for important reasons. Then we have a parietal lobe, occipital lobe, cerebellum, and temporal lobe. So the occipital, temporal, parietal we'll simply refer to as back of the brain. Same thing with middle, which is limbic system, basal ganglia, cingulate gyrus, this sort of thing. And when I say middle or back of the brain, I'm really talking about all that great stuff back there. So here's a nice cutaway of a brain. And this structure, this is all cortex. White matter is the gray stuff there, although it's white in your head. This is the cingulate gyrus, which is considered the top of the limbic lobe, okay? And everything pretty much is a conduit through this area to get to higher cortical areas. This is the corpus callosum, which is wider in women, and that's why women multitask better. And that's how I endear myself to the audience. There's a big ventricle here. And this is limbic material here, so basal ganglia, putamen, caudate, all this really cool stuff that innervates through all this other great stuff. And cerebellum, all right? So just as a quick orientation. So back of the brain. It's more or less a collection system. What's out there, how many, what color, what's it feel like, have I seen it before, that sort of thing. The middle of the brain is going to regulate and distribute, okay? It's also going to perceive a lot of sensory. So this is areas of the limbic system, the thalamus, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, hippocampus, and probably what should be included in there is what's called the insula, which connects with the temporal poles. So this area with the back of the area is very innervated together and ultimately sends its information to the frontal lobes. And this is where executive functioning is discussed. So the executive does what in a company? Receives information, holds the information, allocates decision making, is the person who pulls the trigger, more or less. Okay? We've got enough information, we've figured out everything, go, do this. All right? So right there, you can see how executive functioning, in a large part, is a deficit of the frontal lobes, okay? But also the cingulate, but it also can involve basal ganglia and all this other stuff, because like I said, everything is multimodal. So again, if everything is connected and there's a hitch in the back end of something, that means the information doesn't get to the front end of something, okay? So you're going to have deficited behavior. This is a rat brain. I drew this picture from my last boss. And what it really illustrates here, one, is that a rat doesn't have any frontal lobes, really good frontal lobes. It's got some higher cortex stuff here, right? And all the colors are meant to be different kinds of pathways, all right? And what you see then is what I'm saying, that if you slice something back here, you get effect way out there, okay? And it's a really interesting thing because when you think about brain injury in that, most often when you test brain injury or you interact with somebody with kinds of brain injuries, it can seem very ADD-like, impulsivity-like, disinhibited, that sort of thing. But if you really know your material, you can figure out that, it wasn't this, it was this back here. And it's a really important thing to differentiate. So before I get to the poker analogy, one analogy I have about how this system works, front, middle, back, is like a really good company, all right? So the front is the executive, obviously. The middle is middle management. And the back, parietal, occipital, temporal, and that is sales force, all right? So let's say we have a company out in the middle of nowhere, and what they make is overalls, polka dot overalls, okay? And one day, the executive decides, you know, everybody in town wears these things, they're awesome. Why don't we sell some sales force out to New York City? There's a big market there, and see if anybody else would like these things, all right? So he gathers a few guys from the sales force, and he sends them out to New York City, and these guys have never been out of this little dinky town in Dakota, all right? So they're overwhelmed, blown away. Lots of lights, restaurants, clubs, things to do, loads of fun, lots to drink. And so that's what they do. They party the whole time, they don't do their job. But the next day, they got to call in to middle management and give them a story, right? And they don't want to lose their job, so they make up a story. So what they tell middle management is, you know what? Everybody loves these things. We wore them out last night. Everybody asked where we got them, that sort of thing, right? They're lying through their teeth. Now, the middle manager doesn't have vision, can't see. You can only kind of take that information and organize it a bit, send it frontally to the executive, right? So let's say we got a good compulsive middle manager. He takes this information, he organizes it nice and neatly, and he gives it to the executive, and the executive says, he doesn't have eyes either, and he goes, wow, this is great stuff. Fire up the factory. Let's start making polka dot coveralls, right? And they go out of business in 3 months because nobody in New York wants those things, okay? Can anybody think of what kind of disorder that might look like? Good guess. It could be kind of a sensory thing. Let's say you had a blow where you get part of your quadrant of vision knocked out, and you've lost this quadrant of vision, right? Your executive functioning doesn't really realize it, and someone like that is going to bump their head a lot. They just don't realize that it's gone. So this is the back of the brain sending in bad information like, hey, everything's great, but it's not great, okay? So let's take another scenario. We take our sales force and get them really motivated and send them off, and they do a phenomenal job, right? They collect tons of information, and they think it's awesome, and they send it to the middle manager, okay? But now let's say our middle manager is this, you know, guy in his cubicle. He's paunchy and balding, and, you know, he drinks 5 martinis at lunch. It's not me. And I have an office. And but anyhow, he could care less about this stuff, right? So he comes back from his 5 martini lunch, and he plays Angry Birds for the rest of the afternoon. And then at about 2 minutes to 5, he takes all this phenomenal information, throws it into a file, runs by the executive, tosses it on his desk. I'm out of here. See you Monday. Okay? The executive now has excellent material, but it's so disorganized, he really can't figure out what to do with it, and he's there all weekend trying to figure it out. What might this be? Any idea? Somebody said it earlier. That would be more of your sensory kind of issue, okay? That you've got good information coming in, but in the middle, it gets all jogged around, it can't be interpreted right, and so the overhead lighting drives you crazy, you can't shut it off into the background. That would be a sensory issue, okay? Third scenario. The sales force does a great job. The middle manager is back from rehab, and he's on about 150 milligrams of Zoloft, and he's back to his compulsive ways. So the sales force gets great information. They give it to the middle manager. He not only puts it in a file, but he color codes it, and he puts little tabs on it and a bullet point list on the front, and goes and explains to the executive why this won't work. Okay? Now, nobody wants these things. Dumb idea. And the executive says, you know what? I really don't care. I love these things. Fire up the factory. And they go out of business. There's your ADD. Okay? Not taking the information in that's there and using it in a purposeful, prioritized way, and making poor decisions despite the fact that the guy wants to do really well. Okay? So put that into a kid, and what happens to that kid over and over every day who is motivated, wants to do well, and try as they might, they have bad outcomes. Not every time, but a lot of the time. It's really going to nick their self-esteem. And this is why it's so important to do something early, because I've always said one of the scary things is an angry ADHD teenager with a low self-esteem. That's a problem, okay? If you don't think so, just get on YouTube now and then. Yeah. anything, skateboard. So, so here's a good example of frontal lobe mediation. Think of this as the poker analogy, okay? So you have all this stuff working together in that. And keep in mind, all this stuff is working in real time. It's woven together. There really isn't much of a delay. Hundredths of second delay, okay? And so now we have the poker analogy, and this is to explain how a lot of child behavior can look very ADD and impulsive, but in fact is not. Okay? And it's a way to normalize the behavior. So let's say we're playing poker, and we have $1,000 on the table, and you draw into a straight flush. Okay? Pretty exciting stuff. You're going to make a ton of money. You got a straight flush in your hand. Now, your amygdala, your mad, sad, glad, scared, more or less, and your nucleus accumbens, which is a rewarding area, okay, is getting really geeked about this, incredibly excited. And by being excited, it's sending a ton of excitatory stimulus into the frontal lobe. Everything coming into the frontal lobe is excitatory. The frontal lobe, being as powerful as it is as an adult, can take that information and send inhibitory information back down the ventral pathways and block it. Okay? So you give a poker face. And I lose a lot of money to you. You see? That's how it's supposed to work. Now, let's pretend that we're playing a 7-year-old poker, and there's 1,000 gummy bears on the table, and the 7-year-old draws into a straight flush, right? Now, what are they going to do? They're going to jump out of their skin. They're going to say, I win, throw the cards down, and they're going to say, you know, they're never going to realize that they could have had 3,000 gummy bears, all right, until they're on their therapist couch in their mid-30s talking about other things also. And, but that's normal, because that 7-year-old, when they're born, that limbic system is cooked and ready to go. And that amygdala and nucleus accumbens are functioning as good as ours is. But the frontal lobes develop over time, all right, into your late 20s. Some even say early 30s. I think late 20s is probably more accurate. But it's developing over time, so there's always going to be a bit of this asynchronous, where you got this one thumping system that's working correctly, sending excitatory stimulus into an area that can't inhibit it all back down. That's a rare kid that can. It's going to look impulsive. It can look ADHD, but it's not. It's perfectly normal. Do you work with kids? Yeah. No, you. I'm sorry. The neuropsychologist. Kristen, right? That's the difference between adult neuropsychology and kid neuropsychology, is that there are a lot of things that if you put it in an adult, it would be incredibly impaired, but it's normal for a kid. And if you don't understand development in a kid, and you take your kid to an adult neuropsychologist, they can easily make a misdiagnosis of your normal kid. Any thoughts on this?
So how do you definitively diagnose ADHD then, or ADD in general?
Well, in my practice, in a way, we do a lot of testing. Yeah. I mean, we don't use checklists in my practice. Everybody heard of checklists? Yes. Okay. Y'all know what they were originally designed for, basically? Research. That let's come up with a way of measuring something, do some sort of intervention, and then measure it again and see if we got result. Okay? But insurance companies realize, hey, we can make a lot of money on that and keep a neuropsychologist out of making money by saying, well, you can figure out ADHD with a checklist. And when this is a gifted lecture, the thing I'll usually say is, has anybody ever seen, who's seen checklists, seen a checklist that says, this child is brilliant? It's not on there. So if you're doing a checklist on a brilliant kid, you've totally factored out a ton of who that kid is. Okay? So you can get false positives with checklists really easily. So we do a ton of neuropsych testing. So Alan Mirsky says attention is not just one entity, but it is multiply determined. So now everything gets exponentially more complex, because now we're saying everything within everything is multiply determined. So executive functioning and attention is prefrontal to the motor cortex. So we'll talk about working memory, inhibition, planning and organization, and focus execute. And first one is working memory. So these are all the things that more or less your frontal lobes do, and I'm simplifying it because there's a lot of subcortical stuff in here too. So working memory is the ability to hold 2 or more points of thought in mind and simultaneously use that information to generate novel solutions or direct behavior, right? So one way of getting this is one way. I mean, we do multiple tests for each element, okay? If I say 274, tell me that backwards, and you say 472, okay, it's suggesting that you have some working memory depending on your age. So if I do that again and I say 865 and you say 567, well, what happened? you just showed me a second ago that you have the capacity to do 3 digits. Why couldn't you do it again? Likely it's attention. Or maybe you started before I got done and it was impulsivity. Okay? So even though I get a score on something, I'm also going to look at it qualitatively, which is really important in doing these kinds of evaluations. So working memory is incredibly important, because if you can't hold and use information simultaneously in the here and now, then you can't think ahead very well, right? You can't engage in future memory, which means I have a goal out here. These are the steps I have to do to get to that goal, and these are the things I have to do to meet each step, and I'm going to keep all that online to achieve the goal, right? So if you can't think ahead, then you tend to be stimulus bound because you don't self-direct behavior well. So we've all heard of kids that are followers, right? These are kids that are kind of interesting. If I do a continual performance test with them, they'll do really poorly on the easy part, but on the higher distractibility part, they'll tend to do better because it captures them. It's the kind of kid that could sit with a video game forever, and they're not giving attention to it. It is constantly reattracting their attention, okay? Same thing for TV. I've had parents say, well, you don't know what you're talking about because my kid can watch TV for 8 hours, right? And after I say, why the hell would you ever let your kid do that? My next line is, they're not watching McNeil-Lehrer Report, right? They're watching fast action videos, stuff like that, that reattracts attention. So stimulus bound, Ralphie. And if you're stimulus bound, then how do you anticipate consequences to your behavioral choices? You don't. So this is why you always hear about the guy that killed 4 people. They put him in prison. He was a model prisoner, and they let him out in 6 years. And he turned around and killed 4 more people. Why? Because in prison, he's stimulus bound, and there are very strict rules of what to adhere to, where you don't have to direct behavior. You respond to a bell, a whistle, or a buzzer. Okay? But when you're on the outs, and you're at a bar half drunk, and someone gives you some stink eye, well, there isn't a bell to say go back to your cell. And you've got to deal with that issue. And if you have an impulse control problem and working memory failure, and you don't think ahead to the consequence, or you don't think, gee, I just got out of prison 3 weeks ago, right? You act. So stimulus-bound behavior looks very impulsive. I've always hated the term hyperactivity, because hyperactivity, you get people that think, well, that child just has too much energy then, which is ridiculous. That child has no more energy than anybody else. They're just incredibly disorganized in their behavior, okay? So, I was going to say, anybody here diagnosed ADD? I got diagnosed ADD as a kid. I was the first kid on the block taking Ritalin. Years later, I was the first kid selling it. But anyhow. The thing about it is that I actually had teachers that would have me run the track. You know, Paul, you're doing it again. Go run the track, okay? Stupid. I mean, it was great for me because I wanted to get the heck out of the classroom. But it's dumb because the person's thinking they can run the ADD out of me, run the energy out of me. And really what happened is all it did was fatigue me, and now you got a fatigued ADHD child in your class. So working memory is a key area, and it can get undermined easily by impulsivity and inattention. Because if I'm not paying attention to the information that I'm supposed to keep in my head or that I'm supposed to encode into my head, I don't get that information then. It's not there, right? Or I get off track from it and I can't use it. By the same token, if I act before I think, which is the key to impulsivity, right? I'm acting before I'm thinking, otherwise I wouldn't do the crazy things that I do, then I don't even get to use my working memory. You see? So, it's the inhibition is behavioral outcome of an intact working memory system, as working memory allows an individual to self-direct behavior. A lack of working memory will result in poorly self-directed behavior. So you can get impulsive-like behavior due to limited working memory or a true blue impulse control deficit. So inhibition is not being able to stop when you should, and it undermines working memory, like I said. So an individual, you can have, in gifted kids, I co-wrote a book on gifted. So we get kids that have these massive IQs, okay? I mean, we've had a few that had IQs into the 170s, highest I've ever tested. And impulsive is all get out, all right? And it's really a tragic thing to watch because this is a kid who can synthesize so much information in real time, but they're frequently acting before they're using that ability. And so they come off not that bright, a lot of them, okay? Because they're not using this massive thing to hold information. So intact skill set can be undermined by impulsivity, and it would really be at this level here, the cingulate, and I'm not talking about neurochemistry right now, nor will I, because it's boring. Anyhow, so think about inhibition. What if you truly couldn't command your inhibition? You couldn't allocate it, okay? Well, then you can't put on behavioral brakes. And the next slide would be this. Can't versus won't. And when you really understand this, it completely changes your view on most kids that you work with, okay? Can't versus won't. So, for instance, the way I was taught neuropsych is a lot of things in the brain don't conform to a bell curve. Everything's tested that way and it's forced into a bell curve, but it doesn't conform necessarily. There are lots of things that are have, have not. And what that means is if something is a have in your head, it means you can do it reliably and consistently on demand as long as you want, whenever you want. If it's a have not, like attention, it doesn't mean that you are always inattentive. It means you're frequently inattentive. You don't have control over it, okay? So sometimes under the right circumstances, you can attend quite well, but in other circumstances, you attend even worse, okay? So have-not's pretty important. It changes your view of intent versus willful behavior. Think of it this way. Everybody heard the diagnosis, oppositional defiant disorder? Okay. I think I've diagnosed it twice in the last 3 years. That's it, all right? I think the dry air is making me dry. But anyhow, think about it this way. I'm sure in medical school you got taught base rates. Sound familiar? Okay. Base rates. It's a fast way to narrow diagnoses down. Given this set of symptoms, how often does it occur in this population, given this set of parameters, narrows it down to these 4 diagnoses that you should follow up on first, and it saves time, it saves money, that sort of thing, okay? So think about a kid comes to, let's say, my practice. They got 2 good parents at home that aren't drinking and drugging and beating on each other. They both work. They both take care of this child. The child has 3 meals a day, is in a nice warm bed every night, right? Nobody's hurting this kid. Nobody's doing anything to this kid. They love this kid, okay? Why would he have ODD? Why would that be there? And I'm also assuming they're sane, okay? They're not putting him into these weird, you know, kind of power struggles or double binds. Odds are that kid wouldn't have ODD. But if he can't control his inhibition and that is intermittent, then there are times then in class he's going to look pretty good, and there are times in class where he's going to look awful. And the teacher inadvertently is going to say, hey, he did this thing yesterday, he can't do it today, he's being willful, he's being hard-headed. And it couldn't be further from the truth. The ability isn't available today at this moment, okay? So it changes our view of intent, changes our view of goal-directed behavior versus planning and organization. Here's another story. When I lived in Chicago, I worked for Ira Chasnoff at Children's Research Triangle, and I was lucky enough to test kids from all over the world with fetal drug and alcohol exposure and drug exposure and all this stuff. And I had another parent saying I didn't know what I was talking about. Happens all the time. And because she told me that her 4-year-old has planning and organization ability, and I said it wasn't there. And she said, well, wait a minute. Last night, this little girl got out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. She tiptoed out of her room. She pulled her mother's door shut. She went to the refrigerator. She got hot dogs out. She put the hot dogs in the microwave. And then she realized she couldn't reach the on button, so she tries to pull the microwave off the counter and put it on the table, right? And drops it on the floor. She goes, that's planning and organization. No. Wait a second. So what she's trying to sell me is that in this 4-year-old's little mind at bedtime thinks, you know, at 3 o'clock this morning, hot dogs sound great, okay? I'm going to set my internal 4-year-old alarm clock to 3, 4 o'clock, get up and get those hot dogs. And I know I'm going to have to tiptoe, pull mom's door shut, get to the refrigerator, get those dogs out, put them in the microwave. She's going to do all that and not realize she can't reach the button, okay? What really happened is this. Impulsivity, stimulus bound, every step of the way. The child happened to wake up at 4. She realizes, God, I'm kind of hungry, okay? Gets out of her bed. Mom's door is right across from her bed, sees that it's open. She's no dummy. She goes and pulls it shut, stimulus bound, right? See it, do it. Goes down the hallway, gets the hot dogs, does everything. Never occurs to her she can't reach the button, drop the microwave on the floor. There's no planning and organization in it at all. You see? So what? Real scared. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure she'll be getting it before the next few days. So again, if I understand the disorder, I can explain behavior that seems really willful, really isn't. Okay? There's another, and the reason I want that to happen is it saves a heck of a time in psychotherapy with parents to understand their kid, and it immediately changes their view in the relationship with the child when they understand this process. So, changes our view of generalizing treatment gains in the office. Earlier in my career, I worked at Laura Beadle Children's Hospital and Research Center in Chicago, and that was with the rat brain boss. And as part of the UC system, and I learned a big lesson there. I had this little boy in my office, about 7 years old, and he would respond to anybody who would do anything aggressive to him on the playground, okay? And so we're doing play therapy, which I used to do, I don't do anymore. And we got our puppets out, and we're doing these problem-solving methods, and what are you going to do when this happens, and what are you going to do when that happens, and his puppet says what to do, and he totally knows what to do, right? And I'm taking him through these ridiculously long, idiotic ideas on what are all the steps you're going to have to do and to behave yourself and not hit that kid back, okay? And he's able to say it all back to me. I go out to the waiting area and tell his mom, Timmy's never going to do it again. He's awesome. He's good to go. Happy idiot. And I get a call back the next day. She's like, you don't know what you're talking about. He got suspended again because he hit a kid on the playground. Again, let's think about it. Think of those anger steps. It's exactly the same process. Here I am, the neuropsychologist. I'm supposed to understand ADD, and I am treating him like he doesn't have it by saying, if you do this, 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 and this, and these 4 things too, and the subset of these other 8 things, right? Then you should be able to control yourself on the playground, and he hit that other kid because I don't exist when I'm not there, right? To him, I don't exist. And when I tap him on the shoulder and say, what were you supposed to do? Oh, yeah, I was supposed to do those 10 things with the 8 subsets, okay? But it's not going to occur to him. So he's not a bad kid. I was a bad therapist. Okay. So moving into more planning and organization, there is no planning and organization lobule in your head. You have to have intellect, you have to have language, working memory, inhibition, and attention, some focus, execute to do it. So it's the direct result of those things I just said. You have to keep things in mind to think. You have to be able to think to plan to organize, and inhibit extraneous stimulus or behavior to think ahead and maintain. So if you don't do these things, or you don't have the ability to reliably do those things, everybody hear about, one of the main things you always hear about ADHD kids is they don't finish anything, okay? In part because of this, they can't keep it on track. Start, can't finish. So how do you factor consequences in your behavior? How do you inhibit or direct your own behavior? How do you change your behavior? How do you get your homework done and clean your room? Can't do it, okay? It totally goes against the disorder. You can do parts of it, right, and really want to do it well, but you can have poor outcomes. So the homework thing is interesting because one of the reasons why the kid I was just describing at La Rabida could do the things he could do in my office is because I was being a tutor. I wasn't being a therapist. And this is why a lot of these kids do beautifully with a tutor and bomb the test the next day. Why? Because the tutor's being the executive and asking the key who, what, when, where, why questions. When you have ADD, that's probably not what you're asking yourself. Because if you could ask those things, you'd be thinking ahead, right? And you'd be taking the time to do it. But if you don't have power over that, you can't do it, you don't think of those things. So again, impose structure where the tutor does beautifully, take the structure away, it falls apart. And I'm being kind of dramatic like that, it's not absolute. So moving into some other things. Focus, execute. This is Adam Mirsky's work, and I would love to come up with a better name for it, but it's a cool concept. And later in this, I have a bunch of questions that Deb wrote down that a lot of people would be interested in. this is a key issue in your head. Focus, execute. The ability to add a novel trait or behavior to a mastered or habituated behavior because the brain modifies what it knows, okay? The reason why the hammer and the nail is there is because if you have poor focus, execute, you exemplify the line of, what is it? If all you have in your tool bag is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? You just don't have a lot of latitude, okay? So, focus, execute is, I added a new slide this today. What if you can't blend new information into habituated information? Your learning is impaired. Think about it. If I can't go from training wheels to 2 wheels pretty smoothly and efficiently, I've got a problem. If I can't go from multiplication to division, I've got a bigger problem. If I can't go from 5th grade to middle school and manage 6 different classes and 6 different places and a locker and a book bag, I've got a bigger problem. And if I can't go from dating to marriage, I'm Charlie Sheen. I just thought of that. What I usually say is if you've met somebody who's been married 5 or 6 times, they probably have a focus execute deficit because they don't blend new information into an old skill smoothly and efficiently. That's what learning is all about. It takes adaptability, flexibility, cognitive adjustment, and speed, okay? For a long time, people used to really poo-poo speed, but speed is incredibly important. Well, for instance, if there was a long delay in your dog between bow and wow, do you think he'd be very bright? Probably not, okay? Right there. When you hear an athlete interviewed and every other word is and you know, that's not a heck of a lot there going on. They're not stringing stuff together smoothly and efficiently. There's a really cool thing you can look up on, I think it's on YouTube, if you just put in PFIT, Parietal Frontal Integration Theory. It's really cool. What the guy's talking about is how to measure how fast information travels through white matter. Okay, and he does it with this magnetoencephalogram. It's really interesting. Now, he pairs it all to intellect, and he's wrong because he's oversimplifying it. But the point is you got to have some speed on board to factor information in real time. Otherwise, you're just going to get distracted all over the place. If I'm doing a quadratic equation and I haven't mastered multiplication to the level of if you ask me what 8 times 7 is, I should be able to say 56 as fast as if you said, what's your name? Right? That's consolidation. Well, then I have to go over here and factor multiplication, and I'm raising the error variance of 1, am I going to factor that right? And 2, am I going to plug it in the right spot and get that whole big problem correct? You see? So this stuff, the speed part of this is really important. If you can't consolidate information into procedural memory in the first place, then driving a car would be incredibly difficult. Would be difficulty. I ordered a pot of coffee at the hotel. And I think I did this before I got there. Think about it this way. Focus execute allows you to do complex things. And when I say automate, complex things without thinking about them. And what does that do? It frees your cognition. It allows you to think about other things. So think about this. Think about the first time you drove a car by yourself. It seemed huge, right? You had to concentrate and oh mercy, right? And it seemed really, okay. Think about how you drove here tonight. Chimp, easy, right? It took hardly any thought at all until something in front of you happens and bam, all your cognition is right there to problem solve immediately, okay? That's good focus execute. They use this in the military. For instance, if I take a grunt in the Marines and I put him in a foxhole and I shoot bullets over his head for a while, I'm going to get him to the point where he can habituate that and he's not going to panic in the face of it. So that when it happens on a battlefield, he can actually execute the plan that's been given to him and not panic. Or if he's a fighter pilot and I teach him how to fly a plane as good as you and I can drive a car, and then I put him into a simulator and throw all these curveballs at him that he can do them without even thinking, wax on, wax off. And when he gets into the real thing, he can do a lot of things without thinking, and again, frees up working memory to problem solve in the moment. Okay? So again, what if you couldn't do that? Right? You'd be incredibly impaired. So later on, I'll talk about some learning disorder stuff, spelling disorders, reading, math. And the thing that I haven't seen much about this, and I've talked to Dr. Colsey a lot about it, is this is an innate learning disorder. This is the kid who just doesn't get it. The kind of kid who you teach him, don't hit your brother, but he goes to school and hits everybody. Or he goes to a gym and hits people. And you got to teach him at school not to hit people, at the gym not to hit people, in baseball not to hit people. Because what happens if you don't habituate information, then you can't generalize it and allocate it to every environment where it fits. You don't see the link, okay? Add inattentiveness to that. Add impulsivity to it, working memory failures to it, because everything I'm talking about, again, is woven together and all happens at once. This would be a huge impairment. We see this in a lot of the kids that have, that can read and do things like that, but their learning is just horrendous. So, requires flexibility, allocation of attention and resources. It takes reasoning ability to do this. Cognitive speed, like I said, fluency of thought. Ultimately, you get skill integration. Shift, I'm not going to talk a lot about, but shift is the ability to take key information from your environment and use that information or be sensitive to your environment to take what's coming back at you and adjust your behavior or your problem solving, okay? So for instance, those of us who've been diagnosed with ADD or know kids with ADD, it's really difficult for them to take responsibility for what they did, right? And they'll come up with any reason why they did what they did. Well, if you guys hadn't done what you did, I'd have never done this thing over here that I did, okay? It's all your all's fault, right? Part of the reason is if I didn't have ill will and I was just in the moment and I'm a see it, do it person, happened before I even realized it, kind of, okay? And so I didn't have ill will. It's had a negative outcome. So then what do I have to do? I got to lie about it. That's why these kids lie so much frequently. It's in my mind why they do. Because I got to backpedal now. I didn't mean it, so I got to come up with something, right? Otherwise I'm like this little junior psychopath. So shifts is the ability to, move off of one thing and onto another when you should, based on what's going on in your environment. A lot of kids with ADD, they're the last kid to stop making the joke. Okay, we're done with it, right? And this kid is still, making that joke. So it takes concept formation, it takes inhibition, it takes procedural memory to sustain shift, and it takes cognitive flexibility. Usually I talk about the Wisconsin card sort test, but for time I thought I wouldn't. And then sustaining attention. Now, obviously, the ability to sustain attention takes neurochemicals, dopamine, okay? And if that system isn't working right, you're not going to attend very well. The problem is that we see a lot of confirmatory bias. And it blows my mind that this still happens, but it happens. The doctor says, well, I don't know. It sounds like ADD. Let's put him on Ritalin, see if it works. Right? Scary. Okay? What if that kid had diabetes? I don't know. It seems like diabetes. Let's put him on insulin, see if it works. They would never do that. It's insane. Okay? The thing about Ritalin, though, is it's a stimulant. Okay? It's going to work on almost anybody. I mean, there's a lot of Starbucks in this country, right? So a little bit of stimulant goes a long way. Even if you don't have ADD, you can still focus a little bit better, okay? And it's going to have a curvilinear relationship. You're going to get so high, and then it gets in your way, okay? So it's really inappropriate to diagnose it, base it on the medication working. So sustaining is the ability to allocate attentional abilities as mediated by the frontal executive function system, in part and neurochemical, okay? And the reason why the girl is on there as opposed to a boy is most of the girls we see for ADD are 13, 14, 15. Because that's what they did in elementary school. They weren't the wired boy bouncing out of his chair. It's that, right? Sitting, thinking about fairies, everything is going over my head, okay? And I'm kind of under the wing of my teacher, and I'm being directed by my parents. So why does it show later on? Because later on, I'm being given freedom to make decisions for myself, and now the deficit becomes self-evident, growth in the deficit kind of thing, okay? So we see these girls later on. So it requires vigilance and inhibition from distractibility, has to do with arousal, partly the reticular activating system. And it's kind of cool to think about some of these things evolutionally. I've seen ideas that, in part, a lot of people will say, oh, ADD is way overdiagnosed, okay? Can't be that frequent, that often, right? I don't know. We diagnose it a fair amount, and we're pretty darn careful with it. So let's say there is a lot of ADD. Why would that be? Well, the frontal lobes are the newest things to come online evolutionally, okay? And if I'm Og on the Serengeti chipping away at my hand axe, okay, and I don't hear the twig that snaps behind me, then I don't realize I don't get distracted and see that there's a saber-toothed tiger behind me, right? So I get eaten. So distractibility is an important thing. By the same token, think about OCD. You hear about that a lot, obsessive compulsive. Well, if I'm Og and I can't stop chipping away at this hand axe, then I don't make a hand axe. Or if I don't stop storing food, that sort of thing. So, I'm not going to talk about that. So the last area, encoding. Huh? What time is it? Oh, there's a clock right there, 7:30. So, encoding is the means by which one places information into memory for later recall. It requires planning and organization. You got to distinguish it from storage and recall deficits, okay? The reason why this is on there is because it's really important. In a private practice like mine, I would say, this is Shay, she's my office manager. She also does our program, our neurocognitive stuff she got training for in Linwood Bell. 2-3 times a week we get a call from a parent, child has a short-term memory deficit. My kid has a short-term memory deficit. Think about it. What are the odds of that, right? I mean, unless your kid had a blow to the head, had a really bad delivery and birth injury, or some sort of disease process or what, now who knows what. But if I rule all that out, what are the odds that someone is just innately going to have an encoding deficit? I can give them the same magazine every hour and they wouldn't know it. They'd be massively impaired, right? Okay, so if I can simply rule that out really fast and look at other things, why that would be, again, it really comes back to attention, okay? Meaning that if the teacher is lecturing and I can't pay attention to her reliably and consistently and I kind of drift in and out, well, I'm going to have pockets in what I encoded. So if the teacher says you got math homework tonight, do page 37, every other problem in the left-hand column, and I miss one word of that or 2 words of that, I don't know what my homework is. So as Timmy, I come home, Timmy, you got homework today? Yeah, I got math. What do you have? Don't remember. So Timmy must have a short-term memory deficit. And it's not that. It's that it didn't get encoded in the first place, so it's not available for recall. So it looks like an encoding deficit, you see? But again, if we only look at the surface of things without testing, or I don't know, thinking it through a little bit, it's really easy to make a misdiagnosis. So good encoding requires working memory, dividing attention, language comprehension, semantics, thinking in categories. If you don't have good semantic reasoning, how do you make categories for which to encode into? How do you use working memory to try to figure out, while you're encoding, is there a pattern to what I'm encoding? And break that down into categories, because then you would be that much more organized and efficient in your recall. Here's a list of tests we do for it. So the funny thing is this. Let's say a kid nails sentences, sentence repetition. I read a sentence, they say it back to me. I read another sentence, a little longer, they say it back to me. So let's say the kid gets a 98 percentile, smoking, 130 score if 100 is average, okay? But let's say on digits forward, where I say 274 and all they got to do is say 274, they do 4 digits and bomb it and get a 2 percentile. Does that kid have an encoding deficit? Yeah, it's attention. You can't, here's a great one, you can't fake good on a skill set that you don't have. And it sounds really simplistic, but it's powerful. You might have seen this, Christine. I've had teachers that say, Timmy isn't as smart as that IQ score he got. You know? I mean, it sounds ludicrous when I just said it out loud like that, but I get that, okay? You can't fake it if you don't have, you can fake bad, but you can't fake it if you don't have it. So if on, let's say, any one of these or 2 of these, I get really good score, but the others are kind of 25 percentile, 45 percentile hit and miss, and I pair it with the other data that I've always collected on everything else I've just talked about, it's really too easy to explain what's going on there. You see? And then that's going to explain a lot about behavior. It's going to explain a lot about homework. It's going to explain a lot about learning. So, real quick on executive functioning and attention, then the system works immediately and simultaneously. A breakdown in any part of the system undermines optimal functioning, becomes increasingly mediated by frontal lobes with age. The importance of planning and language are often overlooked in memory recall tasks, language especially. And you'll recall better if you use things, put it into information semantically. So that's the main part of this lecture. Questions?
I do have a question. So when you first started, you showed a picture and you had a funny comment about how women multitask better.
The corpus callosum.
Yes. So,
I don't know if that's true. I just read it somewhere. It sounded logical to me.
yeah, well, I'm kind of curious. You read about boys being diagnosed with ADHD more frequently. Yeah. But girls have it too.
Absolutely.
And does it look different if indeed women naturally can multitask a little bit better than men do? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I don't know. It makes interesting sense. The corpus callosum basically connects the two hemispheres of the brain, and there's the anterior commissary, and all this communication goes back and forth right through there. So it would make sense that you're using more of it more efficiently. So I can't explain it further than that because I haven't studied it much. Yeah.
Are there successful treatments for kiddos with ADD or ADHD?
Oh, that's why we're here tonight. Yeah, absolutely. What Deb does at Learning Pathways works beautifully. She does a program that we used to do, and she's learning the program we do now that we've developed. Really briefly, in our program, MC squared, that's motor cognition squared, because motor or cognition is the extension of your motor system, and if you do our program, you'll be exponentially better. Every mental exercise, be it working memory or sustaining or an encoding task, is paired with a motor exercise, okay? And so, again, and I'm saying this very simplistically, you gotta read some Coleshill stuff, but if cognition is the extension of a motor system, and I can bring the two together better, then I have better control. Darn it, and that's the thing I forgot to do. I have these great slides on pre and post handwriting that we've gotten. I forgot to bring it up here. Real quick, the program is a lot of mental exercises. Like, for instance, let's say something really simple, like I'm going to teach a child to march in an atypical way. Okay? So it's not like regular walking, but it's an atypical march. So to execute that march, they have to think about it, concentrate on it, and we're going to do it over and over. So I want to develop a procedural map. I want to make it automatic. So procedural map, I'm bringing in the cerebellum, okay, which is so much more than just motor movement. It's your little brain. So anyhow, if I can get that automated to where the kid can do that without thinking about it, and now I'm blending in working memory skills, like you're going to march, and you're going to spell your name backwards, and you're going to say a letter of your name every time the left foot hits the ground. So you're multitasking while you're doing the habituated skill, and you get better and better at it, okay? Think about it this way. I love this line. Can't stand the person who came up with it, but I love the line. In terms of OCD, anybody ever heard of a toddler getting diagnosed with OCD because they were persistent about learning how to walk? Did any parent of that gifted toddler ever say, well, you're really not liking this, so we're just going to jump you to running? Okay? You can't. You got to get those procedural maps down. And the reason why they have to do it over and over and over is to lay down those memory tracks so that you do it without thinking. The more things you do without thinking, the better you get at it. There's a really good book called Wisdom Paradox, Auxiliary Brain, by Elkanah Goldberg, okay? And it's about the aging brain, and that how a lot of people who are older achieve their greatest career milestones, creativity, all these things because they have so many procedural maps laid down that they don't have to go through all the steps of problem solving. They've been there, done so many of that, it's like, bang, here's your solution. It's really cool. It's fascinating. You had a question?
Yeah, okay, so I think what you're saying is that ADHD is some kind of probably combination of several of these things, and that's why everybody's ADHD is probably different, because somebody may have inhibition problems, somebody may have working memory problems more than the other, and it's sort of a basket of things that go on.
And for us, we rarely see a true blue working memory deficit. What we see is the variance of working memory expression. So go ahead.
Okay, because I'm wondering, because is there any hope for people with poor working memory? I mean,
oh, without working memory, that would be a tough one.
I know, especially like in high school. I mean, I feel so badly for those kids.
Yeah, that would be a tough one. But again, I don't think that one's that common. I mean, we've tested thousands of kids, and I could think of maybe 10 cases where they true blue had working memory deficit. But here's an interesting thought about ADD. In terms of medication, primarily it's going to be a stimulant, okay? Okay, what else?
I use lately a lot of
Intuitive?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What a lot of those medications are going to do is they'll work on inhibition and they'll work on attention. They're not going to do a thing for executive functioning. Okay? They won't do a thing for focus execute. They won't do a thing for shift. So you could have a child with a severe executive function deficit, you put them on medication, they attend better, they inhibit better, but they still have a lot of problems. So one of you two.
What's the percentage of girls then when they go from elementary school to middle school? You said when they have to do all the classes, and then you start noticing girls with this.
I have no idea, but we start to see them more frequently at that age. I don't know what the percentage is. Sorry, do you know?
No.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's widely underdiagnosed in girls when they're young, latency age. But when they get older, then you start to see it, and you get all this acting out behavior and stuff.
So if you worked on mapping for them before they entered middle school, would that
Yeah, I think so.
benefit?
Yeah, probably. You know, and when I say this stuff, I don't say it as a cure. What we always say is improvement. If it was a cure, it'd be national news. You know, but we get great, great improvement. Yeah. Oh, you're next. Yeah, go ahead.
So with your MC squared approach, they can now march in a new pattern and do it backwards and say each letter of their name.
Right.
Each time they step their left foot on the ground. But does it transfer into schoolwork? I mean, does it transfer into other activities?
Perfect question. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think it literally is changing brain function. I've talked, Elkanon Goldberg, I've said his name a couple times. He's a real bigwig in neuropsych. He trained with Alexander Luria. He really knows his stuff. He does a similar program in New York, and I ran our program by him, and he's like, after he got done twitching and sweating and everything, he's like, oh, you're right on the money. That's exactly how it works. And the reason why it's going to generalize is because I'm not teaching tricks. I'm not teaching you to use a mnemonic. I'm teaching you to work your brain, use it or lose it kind of system, okay? If you work it correctly in these, stepwise methods, you get better control over yourself, therefore you execute better. That's what we've seen. I don't know how anybody think about biofeedback here, but there are several people where I live that tout biofeedback as the end-all be-all for ADD, dyslexia, OCD, the heartbreak of psoriasis, and I don't think it works. I mean, biofeedback is mainly meant for, started as more of a pain management kind of thing to help you relax so you can control that, okay? However, it doesn't generalize. You still have to think of the relaxation to get to the pain management. And I think the same is true for ADD. If I sit you in front of a computer and say, think, relax so the dot goes in the middle of the circle and think that's going to generalize to anything, I don't think it will. And the key is, there's got to be a motor movement with it, okay? Motor is key. One of the slides over here was the guy with the basketball. It's Michael Jordan. And he, anybody remember what he used to do? What he was kind of famous for? Well, basketball, yeah. When he would go up for a shot, his tongue would come out. Okay? You think about it. What do you see when you see a little guy really concentrating on how to write? What happens? The tongue comes out. It's a motor disinhibition secondary to concentration. If you look under the table, the leg is bouncing. If you give him a checklist, he'll get diagnosed ADD for being fidgety, when really it's a sign that he's trying to pay attention. Okay? So again, you can't separate motor systems from cognitive systems. They're very important to keep together. So if you're going to do an intervention with them, they need to be blended together as well. Okay? Did you get your question?
And this is backtracking a little bit, but is working memory deficit, or just, it's just a working term that maybe a psychologist gives you when it comes to your child, is that very often then perhaps more likely ADD? Is that what you're saying, is that it's very rarely that it's primarily just working? Particularly if there's nothing else presenting, and just that, is it very often that it is just attention?
Yeah. Yeah, that if you're inattentive, then you're not going to encode into your working memory. If you're inattentive and distractible, then you're not going to sustain what you have in your working memory because you're going to get off task, and if you cut back in the wrong spot or something like that, you see?
And is that missed more often in gifted children?
What specifically?
The ADD component?
I think that ADD is way overdiagnosed in gifted kids. Yeah, because giftedness is a lot about intensity. And if we're in class and I've mastered my multiplication tables and we're going over it the 50th time and I'm 7, I'm going to act like a 7-year-old, no matter how smart I am. And the problem is if I act like a 7-year-old who's bored, I'm going to look ADD to a teacher because I'm going to run around the room and goof off and bother people. And if you do a checklist, does the child run around the room? Yes, sometimes never, all the time. Wow. And if that's the extent of the testing, and we don't even look at IQ or other factors in that child, then yeah, he's going to look ADD as all get out.
Real quick, I have somebody who's working with people around alpha and beta waves. Does this ever come into what you're talking about?
I remember studying that stuff in grad school, but I don't.
70s.
Yeah, I mean, you can control things like that. But again, it's being taught how to do it, how to concentrate, how to breathe, to relax, to control those things. That's basically what biofeedback is doing as well. But I don't know that it necessarily generalizes. It might for an adult. But again, if I teach Timmy how to relax to get the dot in the circle, I doubt if on the playground when Bobby punches him in the arm, he's going to think, oh, dot in the circle, dot in the circle. He's going to... What?
Waves. It produces lots of beta waves and doesn't produce alpha waves.
I don't,
Always go, 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 go.
maybe so. I don't remember that stuff. I never got into studying beta waves and stuff like that. I studied other things. Sorry. Yeah.
I wondered what your thoughts were on the use of fMRIs or QEEGs as diagnostic tools, and also have those been used to look at like before and after the program you're talking about, and any differences?
fMRI, we use Lindenwood-Bell in our program too. Lindenwood-Bell is a reading program for dyslexia. It's the gold standard. I mean, it works beautifully. If it's done really, really well the way it's supposed to be done. Learning Pathways uses Lindenwood-Bell. Don't you have a person who was trained by Lindenwood? Yeah, there you go. What?
fMRI.
Oh, yeah. Lindenwood-Bell did studies with fMRI and showed difference in function.
And are QEEGs like surpassing fMRIs as far as diagnostic tools for actually being able to?
Are you talking about like the four-headed SPECT scan or a SPECT scan, QEEG? I don't know that the science is there. There's a lot of people with the SPECT that are doing it, and they show you these fancy pictures of the brain, and this means this, and that means that, and I don't know that it's that there yet. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think someone's asking actually about two different things. QEEG is used for diagnostic purposes in kids who get neurofeedback, which is what looks at the alpha and beta waves. So it's looking at activity while doing tasks on the computer screen, and then they develop a treatment plan based on changing QEEG activation patterns through teaching control, cognitive control on the computer with the EEG hooked up. And the SPECT scans, that my blood pressure goes up when I start thinking about
Me
that.
too.
There've been a few programs that have looked at SPECT scans as a diagnostic tool. One was in Denver, and eventually, I think it's gone out of business. They may have opened back up again somewhere else.
It did go out of business, and it did open up somewhere else. I know the one you're talking about.
They move around a lot.
Yeah, they do, which is not a good sign.
It's not, and there are certainly some things that it can tell you about the brain, but it's not
definitive.
scientifically validated as a diagnostic tool. Right. Most people that I know who understand the use of neuroimaging tools get very agitated when they talk about the use of that as a tool to be a. So it basically shows brain activation, but it doesn't tell you anything about what that child can do on a given test functionally.
You know, the real trick of imaging is what you want is convergent data. You want an image that shows an issue and neuropsych testing that corroborates that, and vice versa. And when it's done that way, you're going to get your best results, you know. So wouldn't you agree with that? Convergent data?
I'm a little biased as a neuropsychologist, but yeah. I would say convergent data is good. I always look for as much information as possible from different sources.
Yeah. The cool thing about neuropsych is you're kind of a detective. You're sleuthing a lot of information to try to figure out why the behavior is the way it is. So you had a question.
Do you have outcome studies for your MC squared?
No, we're just going to start doing that. Well, we're collecting data now. I'm not a researcher. I'm a clinical guy, and so we'll hook up with the right people to run the stats for us and help us design it. But no. Do I need them? Well, if you live in Scottsdale, sure. If you go to Learning Pathways, I don't know if they're going to be doing it exactly the way we do it. So this question here that was put out is why kids can't get words on paper but can dictate them forever. This is a really common problem we see, and usually it's kind of a dysgraphic thing. If a child has really poor handwriting, it's not necessarily a motor thing, it's usually more of a cognitive directive thing, okay? And part of what's happening is they didn't consolidate how to write in a smooth and efficient manner. It's not automatic, okay? So, I've read a lot of material that says, expressive writing is the most complex thing your brain does. You use everything to write expressively, okay? And if your handwriting isn't up to snuff, then what's happening? You have to give cognition over to how to write as opposed to what it is you want to say. So of course the child can dictate, because if I take this part away, all the cognition goes over to dictation. However, I don't have any parents that ever brought me a beautiful dictation that they had transcribed that didn't need a ton of editing. Just getting a lot of ideas down and tell a nice story. So you get kids that can do it, but even that's not perfect, okay? But to me, this is the reason why. And it's the same reason why you get kids who maybe don't necessarily have dyslexia, but are horrible spellers. And we'll see it in our writing samples. Like, say, I give a child a spelling test, and they have lousy handwriting, okay? What happens is as the words get more difficult, the handwriting gets worse, because they're giving more cognition over to how to spell than how to write. You see it almost every time, yeah.
Have you ever also found another component with kids who are really fast, having difficulty with writing because it's too slow for them, their thinking, as a different component?
Yeah, teach them cursive. Yeah. No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the computer. No. The reason why is this. It's got to get consolidated. As a society, we're not at the level yet where you're using the computer for every darn thing. You've got, at some point, to be able to listen and write at the same time. If you don't have that down and you go to keyboarding, you're skipping a major developmental step. It's like skipping crawling, and going right to standing. Crawling is there for a reason, to develop neural pathways, okay? So I always guard against going to keyboard. Or I'll say do it, but not at the cost of the writing, Really work at the writing also.
So why do so many 504s and 92s and stuff like that, they say
because I don't think they've thought it through. I mean, they don't. I've never talked to a school psychologist that's talking about stuff like this, about procedural memory and that sort of thing, about working things over and over. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the other reason is that if they don't give them an alpha smart, they have to teach them handwriting.
And it takes time and money.
Therapists in school to do the work with them, or the parents to pay for an occupational therapist to teach them the handwriting.
Right, and I think a lot of things that we used to put a ton of time into as the norm that we've gotten away from is all money-saving stuff, and then you wind up with these problems. Yeah.
So speaking as a parent of a 6-year-old with this issue, it has been suggested to us that that we offer her keyboarding as an option, and I agree with you. She has to learn to write, but I think that one of the reasons that it's offered is that because of her poor writing skills, that's impacting everything. It's impacting her math, it's impacting her science, because they have to be writing about all this stuff. And so sometimes we try to strike a balance with her, like, okay, you have to write your spelling words, you have to write, a sentence on each assignment, but then if there's, they're supposed to write a big elaborate story, if she dictates it to me, it's going to be 10 pages and like completely just amazing and complex and fantastical.
Sure.
But if she's writing it herself, she's going to get so frustrated with the writing that she's just not even going to do it. So it's either we offer her an alternative while we're still working on the writing, or she's not going to get any of it done.
Right. So the keyboarding is an adjunct to it.
Yeah, but we don't do that. But it's if we do dictation instead.
But even if you do keyboarding, how are you going to learn it? You remember when you took typing in high school? A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, 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 right? A, K, J, A, K, J. You did it over and over. Why? When you stop and think about where your fingers should go, what happens? Your typing slows down because you shouldn't have to think about it. Same thing with handwriting. You shouldn't have to think about forming a P versus a G, right? It should be just like that. And if it isn't, you're going to have problems in all the other facets of writing. And it's the same thing, like I said, about math, that if you don't get those multiplication tables down, it's going to affect math always. And this is a problem we have a lot of parents of gifted kids. Like, well, Timmy gets the idea of it. Well, big deal. Can he do it? That's the real important thing. It's great that you understand it, but can you do it? Consistently, yes.
What's the typical age that people get diagnosed, or not diagnosed with ADHD, but like grow out of it? And like, do you grow out of it at one point in your life?
I don't know. I've thought about that. I'm not sure. I think some people might, but I think more often what happens is you mature a bit, and if you acknowledge there's an issue there, what you start to find is compensatory skills. You start doing things that kind of will automatically help you. For instance, at my house, when you walk in the front door, there's a table there and there's a cute dish there, and the keys, wallet, cell phone, sunglasses go right into that dish. Otherwise, who knows where they are tomorrow. Okay? So it's a routine. And this is what I said earlier, is the other usual treatment for ADHD is imposing structure, consistency, and routine, and trying to teach compensatory skills over and over and over and over and over, so that by the time you're 20 or something, you're like, oh, I have this problem, I really should do it this way, to try to compensate. Good question. So dyslexia, symptoms and common traits and treatment. In my experience, whenever I hear that a child had a lot of ear infections or that they got pressure equalization tubes, red flags go off for possible dyslexia because they missed a key area of language development if their eardrums were tempered and they didn't hear correctly. A lot of those children frequently wind up with articulation issues also because they didn't hear it correctly to articulate it correctly, so they need intervention there. Speech and language. The way that somebody talks, okay, can say a lot about how they're thinking about words and language. If I'm thinking of, did you read Shaywit's book, Overcoming Dyslexia? Awesome book. I mean, if I'm thinking of tornado and I say volcano, there's a sign of how I'm thinking about things orthographically. There's orthographic dyslexia or surface dyslexia, and that is a consolidation issue. That's more along the lines of that focus execute thing where I can see something over and over and over. If I study it hard, I can get it, but it won't sustain. So I'm reading a passage, and I read father 3 different ways in the passage. And I never realize that I'm wrong when I read it wrong. That would be a surface orthographic dyslexia. It has more to do with habituation and consolidation. Phonological dyslexia is more of a language issue where I don't grasp the part sounds of letters, or I don't process them correctly, or I don't allocate them directly, so I can't decode well and I can't sound out well. And so I wrote on there, gosh, so dry. I wrote on there that sometimes you don't even have to test for it. What I mean by that is this. If I give a child a spelling test and the way that they make errors, I can't tell what they're trying to spell, it's probably phonological dyslexia. If they spell cat, K-A-T-T, it's probably orthographic dyslexia. Okay, if they spell it that way all the time, all right? So one is, again, consolidation. You see it over and over, you don't get it. Again, think procedural memory. The other is, it's a linguistic problem, a language problem. Now, the problem in schools is they still, I don't know about here, but my God, in Arizona, they still go by the discrepancy rule of if your IQ is 22 points above 1.5 standard deviations, your achievement abilities, then you don't, if your achievement is 22 points below your IQ, then you have a learning disability, okay? It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It's not clinical at all. All that says is this is a line in the sand. If you're below the line, you get help. If you're above the line, you don't get help, okay? I've tested a lot of kids that are gifted and have dyslexia. The one I always think of is this kid. He goes to this private school in Scottsdale. He self-referred to my office because he only got a 75 percentile on his SATs. My parents would have written the news. He also, and he wants to go to medical school, okay? And so he's like, I got to figure this out. Something's wrong. And the area that he bombed was reading comprehension because he ran out of time. He had to keep rereading to get the information, all right? We tested him. He had like a 138 IQ. I mean, throbbing vein in the middle of the forehead, smart, bright kid. And his achievement scores were in the high 120s. So he beat the discrepancy rule, right? What we did was when the test, certain tests will have a ceiling, right? And you stop there after they get so many wrong. We'll go past that and look at, once things get really difficult, what kind of errors do you start making? Couldn't tell what this kid was trying to spell. And what the issue was why it had gone uncovered for so long was he was a really, really hard worker. I mean, he's putting in hours of study, grinding this stuff in, and more often than not, he's a sight word reader. He's reading based on recognition. So the problem is when you read based on word recognition, you don't read for meaning. You're reading for a logographic recognition of a symbol that is duck, right? But you don't pair, duck, quack, okay? And so when you're reading a passage and you get to duck and you got to think about it for a second, well, what happens? If I'm breaking it down phonetically or I'm trying to pick it up somehow, I am loading my working memory and I'm trailing off on what I just read. So now I've got to go back and read it to try to get the context of how duck fits into the rest of the, oh, in the pond, a duck was swimming, right? Now I get it, okay? So think about the time that takes, right? So here's a brilliant kid who is straight A's and can't pass the SAT. And he had dyslexia. I think it's fascinating. So the treatment for him was Lindenwood Bell and in town before we were offering it. And he wound up going to Northwestern, hated it, went to San Diego, did beautifully. He had a difficult time taking MCATs. He was trying to get accommodation to take the MCATs because the MCATs, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot more reading on MCATs than there is on boards. That there's more comprehension kinds of things and logic and so on, whereas boards it's like, get this, 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 and this, what's the question, okay? It's a different style of reading, and he couldn't do it, okay? So he was doing terrible. Well, he finally had to just suck it up and get into his third-tier school that he wanted. And but from what I heard, he's in residency.
He's learning the same thing.
Yeah, Exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But he wanted to go to, you know, Northwestern or University of Chicago or whatnot, you know. Yeah, whenever I visualize this kid, I picture him in a smoking jacket with an ascot in my office. He's a smart kid. Executive functioning, how and why and what can be affected if there is a deficiency. How, to me, is genetics. Injury is going to cause executive outcomes. Diet, I guess. I've always poo-pooed this, but you know, I get so many parents coming in that saying we cut this out, everything's better. Okay. Allergies, you know, there's the concept now of micronutrition, and that's getting a lot of play in terms of how long are things lasting in your system and so on. Trauma-related hyperarousal. And if you have a kid with PTSD and a bang occurs outside in the hallway and this kid goes through the roof, right? He's responding to that. He's got a hyperaroused subcortical system that causes him to respond very fast. Well, if I don't know that, that's going to look pretty impulsive, inattentive, and oppositional. And then what are the effects? To me, everything. I mean, this gets into everything. And one of the saddest parts that it gets into is social relationships. You really start alienating peers, because if I don't pick up on what you are telling me behaviorally without words, that I should knock off what I'm doing, that you don't like it, that I'm chasing you around with a booger on my finger, right? It's not funny anymore. Then I'm going to start alienating people, and they're not going to be my pal anymore, and I'm the only person at my birthday party. That didn't happen, by the way. It's a joke. My birthday was in August. Everybody was on vacation. That's what my mother told me. So, 2E kids, twice exceptional, gifted with a learning disability or ADHD or something like that. Challenges facing kids with high IQ coupled with LD. Well, I talked about it a little bit. One is that it goes undocumented for a long time, because again, if you use discrepancy rule, a smart kid is going to beat the discrepancy, and so you can't use that. And it's federal law that you can't use it. I can cite it for you. Email me. It's in the law after IDEA. You can take it to a school and say, you cannot use discrepancy testing with my child to figure out LD, and they can't. They have to do something different. Or ask for an IEE and you know, have someone like me or Kristen do it.
You don't in Colorado.
You don't?
Shouldn't be discrepancy testing anymore in the state.
It's not supposed to be in Arizona, but you know what? They do it anyhow because they say this is the rule of our school.
But if you have a really bright kid who just barely meet those standards with no effort, all tuned out, all kinds of other questions about what's going on with them, they completely fall off the chart. It seems like there is no intervention or concern.
Oh, they fall between the cracks, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they're frustrated like that.
Yeah.
He can meet their standards, they're just too easy. He's not getting anything close to where he should be.
Yeah, it's too easy to pass the standard, but by the same token, he might be putting in more effort than same-age peers to get the same outcome. So it's not too easy for him. Do you see the difference, what I'm saying?
I think if I'm oral, that just happens to be this compensatory thing.
Yeah, could be. How are they testing for learning disability orally?
You know what I'm saying is he can pass all of those tests because they're all done orally. He can pass all their standards because they're oral-based standards, but he's having all the handwriting problems. And yet he can sit and dictate a play that's 4 typed pages that has a perfect beginning, middle, and end, and character development, on and on and on. And he can play the piano pretty well.
Shows you it's not a motor problem, doesn't it? And how do you learn how to play that piano? Da 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 da, right? Over and over and over, scales. Unless he's kind of gifted, yeah, then he gets it really fast.
Sometimes a song can do it.
But still, practice, right? He had to learn scales to get that down.
But then writing, he practices and he'll write the same.
But there's a way to break it down. If I practice doing the same thing over, let's say I'm in the batting cage and I practice and practice and practice, but I've got a bad habit that I'm unaware of, and somebody comes along and says, put your foot this way, and I hit it out of the park, that's what we're talking about. It's about finding that. But it's also about breaking it down into base shapes that don't even look like writing. Again, wax on, wax off.
You write it 10 times and then you go to write it paper and write it longer.
Yeah, but if I write it 10 times poorly.
Perfect. He's doing it exactly the right way and then goes to write a paper and you can't write it right.
Okay, then again, you got to take some giant steps backwards. Yeah?
He's allocating his memory somewhere else, and this is not what he's thinking about. He's thinking about whatever he's,
So challenges and that sort of thing, to me, it depends on the learning disability. Usually focus execute is the area that the gifted kids nail. I mean, phenomenal stuff. Let's see, Shay notices behavior problems due to hating repetition. So if she's doing Lindenwood Bell with a child and there's a lot of repetition in it, one of the hallmarks of gifted kids is they hate repetition. I get it. But certain things you have to practice over and over and over and over and over to get it really, really well, to master it. There's a way to overcome it. You just have to work with the child and overcome it. Let's see. They get misunderstood, blamed, you're not trying, you know. You're so smart, why can't you do this? That sort of thing. Oh, God, I forgot I wrote that down. Yeah. How can you be so smart and so stupid? Wife number one. And then lowered self-esteem. Just like I said about ADD, one of the scariest things to me in the world is a angry, low self-esteem, ADHD, learning disorder, gifted child. And then college entrance exams. So you got to find a way to get assistance on those things or accommodations. And I don't know about you, but I have a bear of a time trying to get that done anymore, because one of the things that they do is you could send in a report that's just phenomenal, covers every area, and they say it's not the test that we use. All right, what do you use? We're not going to tell you that. I haven't been able to find it. It drives me nuts, especially with the MCATs. They're really bad about it. Why kids can't remember math facts, spelling words, organization, planning, and what can be done about that. Math and spelling, again, if it's not a phonological dyslexia, then frequently math and spelling have to do with consolidation again. Consolidation, habituation, being able to bring up processes without thinking about it and applying them and generalizing them. Learning pathways, Lindenwood Bell works on those things really well. Inhibition, concentration, paired with motor movement. Again, so that's that whole thing I was talking about, to get at these things. I remember one of my best memories of elementary school was in second grade. We had to line up after recess, and the teacher would say 4s or something, and the class would march in. 4 times 1 is equal to 1. 4 times 2 is equal. I got multiplication that way. Repetition with rhythmic movement. Got it. And what do we do in dance? It's all about rhythmic movement, counting, and that sort of thing. And you get it down with the movement and the cognition. You get it down to the point where you don't have to think about the movement, you can riff on it. Yes? I can't, because I don't do it, but Shay can, and so can Deb. Or you can. She asked, Shelley, can you give a brief description of Lindenwood Bell, why and how it works?
There is kind of, if you imagine, their approach has to do with integrating some sensory cognitive functions, and the different programs address auditory processing, visual memory, and then comprehension. And so there's 3 different programs that Lindenwood Bell uses to address those things, and we can run those at Learning Pathways as well. And basically, based on testing and other information, you could start with auditory processing. That's a program called the LIPS program. And there's also a program called Seeing Stars, which is based on symbol imagery, understanding and having a mental image of the sequence of letters in a particular word in order to establish a strong cyborg base. And then visualizing and verbalizing, which is the concept imagery piece, the big picture, the main idea. So all of those things are kind of circles that intersect. They're not individual worlds on their own, but children can, and adults can have deficits in a variety of areas. And so those programs address those different areas.
The nice thing about doing that and doing it within a program like Learning Pathways or MC Squared is if you have a child who has ADD and dyslexia, if you start them in Lindemood Bell, you're throwing your money away because they can't pay attention to the program. If you do MC or pathways first and you get some attentional systems online better, you teach them ways to come into the program, calm down, and focus, then we blend in Lindemood Bell after they're able to do that, and we get a huge increase in ability. Yeah.
So it's important to first have a diagnosis before you even go to learn pathways?
Well, personally, I think so. I mean, I wouldn't go and get chemo if I didn't have a diagnosis first. I mean, I say that facetiously, but part of the reason I say that so simply like that is, you can't believe how many people go and get treatment when they don't have a diagnosis, and I don't want to label my kid. Well, you got to label them at some level to figure out what to do sometimes.
So is a just 5-year-old too early to have them, taken and evaluated?
A 5-year-old? Oh, no, you can easily evaluate a 5-year-old.
And what's the clinical professional that is the best person to see for that, a neuropsychologist?
I think so. I mean, a neuropsychologist is the one who's going to do the full range of evaluation, look at executive functioning and attention, language, learning and memory, visual, spatial, sensory, motor, and look at that against the backdrop of what happened to that kid in utero, how were they delivered, how did they meet developmental milestones, and were there any toxicities involved? Did they have head injury? Did they have seizure disorder? Anything like that, and weave the whole thing together. Because otherwise, the problem that we see a lot is the parent says, we've gone to everybody. We went to OT. We went to speech. And everybody is looking at it through their little piece, but nobody's really pulling the whole thing together, and that's what neuro does.
And that's just a PhD, right? I mean, you don't have to be a medical doctor to be a neuropsychologist.
No, the MD would be a neurologist. And they do a different kind of testing. They're not doing the standardized cognitive stuff that we're doing. They're going to do more 12 cranial nerve study, that sort of thing. They're not going to do like a WISC or something like that, or Wisconsin, whatever.
Who's not going to?
The neurologist. It's going to be more medically based, yeah. Yeah. You, and then you. Go ahead.
I was wondering, I have an 8-year-old and he is really smart, hasn't been diagnosed gifted or whatever, but his problems are really social, mostly, and I wondered if any of this really focuses on that, or if it's mostly just about the grades.
It depends on what's the origin for the social problem and how's the social problem expressed. If it's an Asperger kind of thing, we've seen a lot of kids with Asperger's that have gotten great results. They still have Asperger's syndrome, but they're doing a heck of a lot better. And a few of them that I'm thinking of did beautifully with the writing part of it also. But and it wasn't about learning scripts. It was about inhibiting and thinking through things, and that previously they weren't doing that. So the one I'm thinking of, he did this one kid, 13 years old, and he was so depressed. And he does have Asperger's, and I say it that way because it's overdiagnosed, I think. And after the program, he was going out into the cul-de-sac and playing with the other kids. He was trying to put himself out there more. He still had this kind of quirkiness about him, but he was so much happier and doing better in school and everything like that. It was really cool.
Are these programs typically an alternative to meds or sometimes in conjunction with? Or?
We've worked with psychiatrists, and if the problem was really severe, is start them on meds just to kind of kickstart and so they can even take part in the program they were so out of control. And then as they do better, talk about weaning, or if we're happy on the meds and life is working well, continue with the program and just leave them on the meds, because they do find that way too. Either or. Yeah.
So for those of us working in a public school, with these kids, I mean, where do we go with this? How do we even start this process? We can't refer all our kids out to.
Yeah, I don't know. You're kind of hogtied because you're really not allowed to say to a parent, gee, I think your kid has ADD and needs treatment, right?
Because I'm a psychotherapist in a school and I'm connected with the mental health center, but there's no neuropsych testing. Medicaid doesn't pay for any of this stuff. So would you... we do, some neuropsychs do. I mean, we do single contract agreements with Medicaid. Send them down to Scottsdale. What do you do with this then? I mean, how do we use this to work, the information you're giving us? Like, how do we use this to work with our kids? The kids that are struggling, who probably are ADHD, or we know are twice exceptional.
Right.
they're not learning the way they need to.
I understand.
They're looking for solutions to
Yeah.
what you do right here in our elementary school.
Right. Well, primarily what you're going to do is management, because like I said, you can't talk them out of the behavior and you can't talk them out of a brain-based disorder. You can manage it. One of the main things I always consider with children is being preemptive. And I want to be thinking way ahead. What is the kind of environment that more pulls for this behavior than other environments? And when they go to that environment, I'm going to have a lot of tricks up my sleeve on how to account for it. That's a whole nother lecture. By previewing or preempting, one of my main things is when I identify the behaviors that suggest that that child is just starting to perk, I'm thinking impulsivity, then I'm going to do something to soothe them, calm them down so the frontal lobes come online a little bit better. And it's very simply put, but it works. If I don't let you get over the top of the roller coaster, you don't go on the wild ride. Okay? So I'm trying to be really proactive with kids and do activities in the class that are not punishing, but soothing, that everybody in the class can do whether or not they have the disorder or not. If you email me, I'll send you a lecture on it, priming, previewing, preempting, disengage, rectify. It works beautifully. It's just a concept of that you can stamp it over any kid. And we've gotten great. I used to work in schools. I used to be a counselor, and I started out as a classroom aide and then a counselor in severe behavior handicap class. And I didn't want to have my kids go to timeout. And so I developed this model. It worked beautifully. Yeah.
What's the youngest age that you start diagnosing children and working with them?
Well, I've got a big background in development, so I mean we work with kids in terms of evaluating brain injury and that sort of thing. We'll go down as low as about 18 months. I don't feel comfortable going lower than that.
And as far as ADHD, things like that, do you really start being able to diagnose it more? I mean, as young?
I'm going to be incredibly conservative in a little guy diagnosing ADHD or just about anything. You know, that isn't more obvious. One, yeah, 5. Part of it is the younger the child, the more error variance you get in testing based on the kind of testing you get, okay? And a lot of that depends on can they interact with a testing environment. But there are other tests that you can give, a Mullins, a Bailey's, different things like that, where it's just a matter of interacting and collating that into data. I'd be hard-pressed to diagnose 3-year-old ADD. I really would. Yeah. Over here, and then you.
How do you know if the child should have a neuropsych exam, or see a psychiatrist to determine if there's depression?
Well, I think the two fields work hand in hand. I mean, a psychologist can diagnose depression too. What I want to do with a neuropsych, if it's not brain injury, is basically use it as a rule out. I'm going to try to test all the different kinds of things in that child to see if there are issues that are causing the behavior. Basically, I'm going to refer to a psychiatrist for medication, and they're going to refer to me to help figure out what's going on because they generally don't do testing.
Is testing as inattentive? For
inattention? I don't know any psychiatrists that do testing for ADD. I know a few that have, like, you know, maybe a continuous performance test in their office, or they use some checklist, but frankly, personally, I'm not fond of that. You know, I don't think that's the way it should be done. Because there's too many false positives, is the bottom line. ADD looks like a lot of different things. A lot of different things look like ADD, you know? So, you're next, and then you folks.
With ADHD and ADD and stuff, does that affect how your body moves?
No, not at all. Yeah.
Do you diagnose ADHD or ADD with a series of visits, or is it just in the first visit that the child sits down with you, or how does it?
We do a comprehensive evaluation generally. I mean, once in a while we'll just do executive functioning and attention, but we really want to look at everything. A lot of the times the kids that come to us, they have some pretty complex questions, so I don't know that it's ADD, and I want to rule out a lot of things. So our evaluation generally is a diagnostic interview with parents that goes from in utero to now. And then we have the child in, and we do generally two 3-hour sets of assessment to get everything that we want to get in. And then we crunch all the numbers and have a feedback session with the parents and teach them what we figured out, how we figured it out, why it is the way it is, and what to do about it.
I know insurance doesn't pay for all of this, and it is cost is always a concern. What does an evaluation got approximately?
We don't take insurance because I couldn't keep my doors open if I did. We charge $190 an hour, just straight $190 an hour. And from what I understand, I think I'm the least expensive in town. I don't know, I just don't. Somewhere in there.
From 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
You're looking at anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000, depending on how long your child takes to tackle.
Which is a really, really detailed evaluation with a lot of time spent teaching you what we figured out, why it is the way it is. You know, it's not just, oh, your child has ADD, go do this. You know, it's specifically how does the ADD work, you know, or executive deficit or so on. Someone here than you.
How do you feel about using tools of the mind for increasing executive function?
I don't know what that is. Sorry. Is that like brain age or something?
What?
Is that like brain age or something?
It's an education program that's out of City Denver about executive function.
I don't know.
What was it called? It's
Tools of mind.
Tools of mind. It's got pieces to cognitive. You know, neurocognitive stuff and pieces. It's a piece of the element.
Yeah.
I've received many evaluation reports where people are, in addition to lots of other testing, they are using the continuous performance time. Isn't it the IBA or whatever?
There's the TOVA, the CPT, the Gordon, there's a few of them out. But you don't just do that. That's one piece.
Right, but you don't think there's no use in doing that? You think that does give you some information?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
You know, the trick of it is this. Any test is only as good as the person interpreting results of that test. You know, I mean, there are tests that you can get an average score, and I'll show you how it's not right, how it is a problem. Or a low score, and I'll show you how it worked okay. I mean, it's kind of the knock on neuropsych is that there comes a point where it gets past science and there is a bit of an art to it. I believe personally, you really got to be able to understand the qualitative input of how everything works. And that's why, you know, in my office, at least 2 or 3 people will work with each child. Because I want several eyes on that child because they'll respond differently to different people. You know, and I want a lot of input. I want to figure out everything. I don't want to leave any stone unturned. So, yeah.
How hard is it to get an accurate IQ test on a child who is dyslexic or learning disabled? It must be harder.
I don't know. Why would it be so hard?
I don't know. I just wondered if they can perform the same.
I think you might see, depending on the test, you might see trends in how it comes out, but and trends that would suggest follow-up with different kinds of testing. But I don't know that it would be that difficult. It's not my experience. You know, if anything, it could be that if you have a child who's developed kind of a learned helplessness from so much failure that they might have an idea of an answer to something, but they're like, I don't know, because they want to be absolutely sure they have the right answer. They're not willing to take a risk anymore, which is kind of sad. But that's not been my experience. Unless I'm incredibly naive and I've missed a lot, but I don't know. Yeah.
Is there someone you'd recommend in the Denver area or the Boulder area for doing diagnosis?
Yeah, apparently Kristen. Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know of any, I mean, I'm not familiar with Denver very well. Do you know anybody beyond yourself that you would, you're in Boulder, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty great. I'm envious.
There are different people in Denver, but they're fewer than you would think.
Yeah. You know, one of the things about neuro that's important, she said there's fewer than you would think in Denver. One of the things that I think is really important about any neuropsychologist you go to is if you're taking your child to a neuropsychologist, make sure they're pediatric trained. There are a lot of neuropsychologists that go through a graduate program running rats and did some testing at internship. All they've seen is adults. They hang a shingle out that they see kids, and they've got no training in it. Kids are a different animal. My cutoff is 30. I don't see anybody older than 30 because I didn't study that stuff. I mean, I didn't study it as in-depth as I did kids. So to me, it would be unethical for me to go beyond that. I just don't. But there's those who would, I'll see anybody, and I just don't think that's right. If it's gifted, I would also make sure that that person at least has been through a few gifted conferences, they've read a few books, because that generally isn't taught in graduate school. I was lucky enough, my program was, at the time, was one of the only ones that taught it. So, last question.
At what point does an attention issue become ADD? Are all attention issues ADD, or is there something?
I don't think so. That's a great question. At what point does an attention issue become ADD? To me, it's not just about attention. It's all the elements that I'm talking about. If you have an attention issue, you're going to be showing elements of what I talked about as well. It's not going to stand in isolation that you're going to have profound working memory, but you can't pay attention. It wouldn't logically make sense. So a lot of other things are going to be involved. And with that, I'm willing to stand around and answer more questions. But for those of you who'd like to leave, thanks for coming. I appreciate your attention. And also, thank Deb on the way out for having me.